The night was quiet, too quiet for a man who had spent most of his life surrounded by noise. The noise of boardrooms filled with voices demanding answers, the noise of deadlines pressing against his chest, the noise of engines from the hundreds of trucks his company owned. But tonight, Michael Grant was alone in the dimly lit parking garage beneath his office building. The echo of his polished shoes against the concrete floor followed him as he walked toward his car. It was late, well past midnight. His assistant had begged him to go home hours ago, but Michael wasn't the type to leave unfinished work behind. He was, after all, the CEO of Grant Logistics, a company he had built from the ground up. Every deal, every decision, every late night had been part of the price he paid to stand at the top. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the sleek key fob, his mind already rehearsing tomorrow's meeting with investors. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was his imagination, just the fatigue playing tricks on him. But then it came again, soft, fragile, and trembling. A child's voice. "Please, help my mommy." Michael froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. He turned, scanning the shadows. The garage was empty. Just rows of silent cars under the humming fluorescent lights. He gripped his keys tighter, forcing himself to breathe. "Please, help my mommy." The voice was clearer this time. Higher. Frightened. And it was coming from his car. Michael's eyes locked on the dark, sleek sedan just a few steps away. He felt a chill crawl up his spine as his gaze settled on the trunk. It was impossible. Completely absurd. But every instinct in him whispered that the voice had come from there. He swallowed hard, his hand shaking as he pressed the key fob. The trunk clicked. His breath hitched. For a man who had signed billion-dollar contracts and faced down ruthless competitors, Michael had never known fear like this. What if it was a trap? What if someone was setting him up? Still, his feet carried him forward. The voice of the little girl echoed in his ears, refusing to let him turn away. He placed his hand on the cold metal of the trunk and whispered to himself, "What the hell is going on?" And then, with a sharp inhale, he lifted it. What he saw inside would not only shatter the steel walls he had built around his heart, but it would drag him into a night of choices, revelations, and danger he could never have imagined. Because in that moment, Michael Grant, the powerful CEO who believed he controlled his destiny, realized that fate had just taken control of him. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want you to pause and ask yourself something. Have you ever faced a moment where one choice changed everything? Michael's about to make his. And I promise you, the truth waiting in that trunk will leave you stunned. Stay with me until the end of this story. You won't forget it. Michael Grant had always been a man of precision. If you asked anyone who worked for him, they'd tell you the same thing. He was sharp, unyielding, and never ever late. Born into a middle-class family in Chicago, Michael wasn't handed wealth, connections, or favors. His father was a steelworker, his mother a school secretary, and both believed in the value of hard work. Michael learned early that nothing in life was free. By the age of 25, he was already working 16-hour days, sleeping in the back office of a small freight company where he started as an intern. When his bosses complained that he pushed too hard, he simply worked harder. When others quit, Michael doubled down. He didn't want to survive, he wanted to dominate. Years of sacrifice, ruthless decisions, and calculated risks eventually paid off. Michael founded Grant Logistics, a company that began with 2 rusty trucks and a rented warehouse. Within 20 years, it had grown into one of the nation's largest privately owned transport empires, moving goods across every state, every hour of the day. Michael had done what few men in his position ever could. He had built a legacy. But success came with shadows. Behind the towering glass headquarters and the expensive suits was a man who rarely laughed and hardly ever let his guard down. To most, Michael Grant was a symbol of power and discipline. To those who knew him intimately, he was something else entirely. Distant, difficult, and sometimes cold. There had been a time when Michael was not just a businessman but a husband and a father. He had married young, too young perhaps. Sarah, his college sweetheart, had once been the only person who could make him forget about work. She gave him warmth, balance, and love in ways he never admitted he needed. But Michael had convinced himself that success was the truest form of love he could offer. He believed that if he worked hard enough, earned enough, Sarah would understand. But love doesn't thrive on absence. It withers. And slowly, Sarah slipped from his life. They divorced quietly, without the public scandal that often followed men of his stature. Michael buried himself in his work, refusing to dwell on what he had lost. Yet, the silence that crept into his mansion each night was deafening. Their daughter, Emily, grew up watching her father from afar. He sent money, gifts, anything money could buy, but rarely his time. When she turned 16, Emily stopped answering his calls altogether. The last word she had spoken to him still haunted Michael. "You only care about your business, not me." That was 3 years ago. He hadn't seen her since. So Michael worked. Day after day, deal after deal. He filled the void with contracts and meetings, numbers and projections. But late at night, when the city lights flickered outside his penthouse window, he sometimes caught himself staring at a photo of Emily tucked into his desk drawer, the only photo he hadn't thrown away. This was the man who had walked into the parking garage that night. A man defined by control, by order, by logic. A man who thought he had seen it all. But life has a way of tearing down even the strongest walls. And for Michael Grant, the sound of a child's voice from the trunk of his car was about to unravel everything he thought he knew about himself, his past, and his future. Because what waited for him inside that trunk wasn't just a mystery. It was a ghost from a life he thought was long buried. The metallic click of the trunk release echoed in the parking garage. For a moment, Michael hesitated, his hand resting on the edge of the lid, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had opened countless trunks in his lifetime. After all, his company managed thousands of vehicles. But this trunk was different. This one felt alive. With a slow breath, he lifted the lid. At first, his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Curled up inside, wedged between a black duffel bag and the lining of the trunk, was a little girl. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with tears, and in her arms she clutched a small stuffed bunny, worn from too much love. Her wide eyes shimmered with fear as she looked up at him. "Please," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "Please help my mommy." Michael's heart stopped. Beside her lay a woman, motionless. Her wrists were bound with rough rope, her lips split, and ugly bruises marked her face and arms. Her blouse was torn, and the shallow rise and fall of her chest told Michael she was barely breathing. The little girl reached out with trembling hands. "She won't wake up. Please help her." Michael staggered back, gripping the edge of the trunk to steady himself. His first instinct was disbelief. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a mistake. Why would there be a child and an unconscious woman in his car? His mind raced with questions. Who were they? How did they get here? Was someone framing him? He scanned the garage, half expecting to see men with cameras waiting to capture his reaction. But there was no one. Just the girl's pleading eyes and the woman's broken body. Michael's throat tightened. Every logical instinct told him to call the police immediately. This was dangerous, messy, and completely out of his control. But something in the little girl's face, something raw and desperate, rooted him in place. Who are you?" Michael asked, his voice unsteady. The girl clutched her bunny tighter. "My name's Lily. Please, help my mommy." Michael's gaze dropped to the woman, and that's when he saw it. Her hand, bruised and trembling, clutched something small and metallic. He leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. It was a locket. Old, scratched, but unmistakable. And when he saw what was inside, his chest constricted so violently he had to grab the trunk for balance. Because staring back at him from the tiny photo inside was a younger version of himself, smiling with his arm around Sarah, the woman he had once loved, the wife he had lost. And the woman lying unconscious in his trunk was Sarah. Michael's fingers trembled as he held the locket closer to the flickering light above the garage. There was no mistake. The young man smiling in the photo was him, back when his hair was longer, his eyes softer, and the weight of the world hadn't yet carved lines into his face. And the woman pressed against his side, her head tilted against his shoulder, was Sarah. The Sarah he had once sworn to love forever. The Sarah he hadn't seen in 15 years. His gaze snapped back to the bruised woman lying in his trunk. Her hair was streaked with gray now, her face thinner, weathered by time and hardship. But even beneath the injuries, he could see her. The curve of her cheekbone, the shape of her lips. It was Sarah. His Sarah. Michael's chest tightened. His throat burned. Suddenly, the parking garage around him seemed to dissolve, replaced by flashes of memories he had buried for years. He remembered the first time he met her in college. How she laughed when he spilled coffee on himself. How her voice carried a warmth that cut through his restless ambition. He remembered late-night walks across campus, her hand slipping into his as if it had always belonged there. He remembered the day he proposed. Nervous, fumbling, yet hopeful. She had said yes with tears in her eyes, promising him that together, they could take on the world. And then came the years of struggle. The nights he spent hunched over ledgers and freight schedules while she waited alone. The birthdays he missed, the dinners he canceled, the arguments that grew sharper with every passing month. She had begged him to slow down, to see her, to see their daughter Emily. But Michael always promised, later. Later, when the business was stable. Later, when the deals were secure. Later, when success was finally his. But later never came. By the time Michael realized what he was losing, Sarah had walked away. She took Emily with her, refusing to fight for a marriage that had already been hollowed out by absence. He told himself it was for the best, that she deserved someone who could give her more, and he deserved the empire he had sacrificed everything to build. But staring at her now, broken and unconscious in the trunk of his car, Michael felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Guilt. Deep, bone-crushing guilt. And then his eyes shifted to the little girl beside her. Lily. Her wide, tear-filled eyes searched his face, waiting for him to do something. Anything. She couldn't have been more than 7. And as Michael really looked at her for the first time, he saw something that made his breath hitch. The shape of her nose. The curve of her jawline. Even the faint dimple on her left cheek when she spoke. It was like staring at a younger Emily. Who's your father, Lily? Michael asked softly, though part of him already feared the answer. The girl hugged her bunny tighter, her lips quivering. I don't know. Mommy never talks about him. She just says he wasn't ready to be a daddy. The words cut through Michael like a knife. He staggered back, his hand gripping the trunk as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The realization hit him like a freight truck. Lily could be his daughter. Another daughter he never knew existed. For a man who had always prided himself on control, Michael suddenly felt the ground shifting beneath him. The empire he had built, the money, the power, it all meant nothing in the face of the fragile child staring at him, and the broken woman who had once been his whole world. But before he could process the storm inside him, Sarah's body stirred. A faint groan escaped her lips, her fingers twitching weakly against the rope binding her wrists. Sarah! Michael whispered, his voice cracking. Her eyelids fluttered, her face contorted with pain. For a moment, her eyes met his. Recognition flickered there. Shock, confusion, and something else. Me. Michael, she croaked. It was the first time she had spoken his name in 15 years. And in that single fragile word, Michael knew this night was only beginning. Michael's instincts screamed at him to call the police. That was the logical choice, the safe choice. But logic faltered when Sarah's weak eyes fluttered shut again and Lily's small voice whispered, "Don't let them take her." For once, Michael ignored logic. He scooped Sarah's frail body into his arms, her head falling limply against his shoulder, and motioned for Lily to follow. The girl climbed out of the trunk, still clutching her bunny, her tiny legs struggling to keep up as Michael carried her mother toward the elevator. The ride up to the penthouse was suffocating. Michael's reflection in the mirrored walls stared back at him, but it was a stranger he hardly recognized. Sweat streaked his temples, his usually sharp eyes clouded with panic. Lily stood pressed against his leg, staring up at him with unspoken trust. When the elevator doors opened, Michael moved quickly. He laid Sarah gently on the long leather sofa in his living room, the sterile, modern decor of his penthouse suddenly feeling too cold for the fragile woman before him. He grabbed a blanket, covering her trembling body, then returned with a glass of water and a damp cloth. He pressed it gently against her bruised forehead, his movements awkward, unpracticed, like a man trying to recall a language he once spoke fluently but had long forgotten. "Mommy!" Lily's voice cracked. She crawled onto the sofa, resting her bunny against Sarah's chest. Sarah stirred faintly, but didn't wake. Michael exhaled shakily and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the keypad. 9-1. His finger stopped. What would he tell them? That his ex-wife, whom he hadn't seen in 15 years, was unconscious in his car trunk with a child who might be his? That some unknown force had put them there? Even he could barely believe it. The tabloids would feast on a story like this. Investors would panic. His competitors would call him reckless, compromised. And worse, what if the police didn't protect them? What if whoever had done this was still out there, waiting? Michael's thumb trembled over the glowing screen. Then, with a sharp motion, he pressed the power button. The phone went dark. For the first time in years, Michael Grant decided to rely not on authority, not on strategy, but on himself. He sat heavily in the chair across from the sofa, rubbing his temples. Lily sat beside her mother, watching him. Her big eyes were cautious, but curious too. Finally, she whispered, Are you the other daddy?" Michael froze. The words hit him harder than any corporate rival ever had. His mouth went dry. What do you mean?" Lily hugged her bunny, her voice small but steady. "Mommy said once that I had another daddy. She said he was smart and strong, but he wasn't ready to be with us. She said maybe one day I'd meet him." Michael's breath caught. He wanted to deny it, to say she was mistaken. But deep down, something inside him already knew the truth. The resemblance in her face, the locket in Sarah's hand, it wasn't a coincidence. His chest ached with regret. Emily, his first daughter, had slipped from his life because he had chosen ambition over fatherhood. And now, sitting just feet away, was another little girl who might carry his blood. Another chance he had never asked for but had somehow been given. As the minutes stretched into an hour, Sarah began to stir again. She groaned softly, her lips parting as she tried to speak. Michael rushed to her side. "Sarah, it's me. It's Michael. You're safe. You're in my home." Her eyelids fluttered open. For a moment, her eyes locked onto his. A mixture of disbelief and relief flickered there. "Michael." Her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "They found me. They'll come for her." Her hand weakly brushed Lily's cheek. Michael leaned closer. Who's coming for you?" Sarah's body shook with a shallow breath. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Men. Dangerous men. They won't stop. I had to hide her. I had to bring her to you." Michael's heart slammed against his ribs. His world, built on certainty and control, was unraveling faster than he could grasp. Someone was hunting Sarah. And by extension, Lily. And Sarah hadn't stumbled into his life by accident. She had brought Lily here to him, because she believed he was the only one who could protect her. Michael sat back, stunned. He wasn't just a bystander. He had been chosen. But by who? By Sarah. By fate. Either way, one truth became clear in that moment. The night wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The city lights glittered far below Michael's penthouse windows, casting a faint glow across the room. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to believe they were safe, that the walls of his empire could keep Sarah and Lily hidden from whatever hunted them. But safety is fragile. And Michael was about to learn just how fragile. Sarah lay resting on the sofa, her breathing shallow but steadier. Lily had fallen asleep against her mother's side, her tiny hand gripping Sarah's blouse as though letting go would mean losing her forever. Michael sat at the edge of his chair, his mind racing. He needed answers. Who these men were, what they wanted, why Sarah had chosen him after all these years. But before the questions could form, something shattered the silence. A noise. Subtle at first. The faintest creak of movement. Michael stiffened, every muscle in his body tensing. His penthouse was on the top floor. No one should have been able to enter without clearance. He glanced toward the security panel by the door. The green light flickered strangely, as if it had been tampered with. Then came another sound. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Not his imagination. Michael's stomach dropped. They were here. He moved quickly, pressing a finger to his lips when Sarah stirred. Her eyes widened in panic as she understood instantly. She gripped Lily tighter, holding her daughter's head against her chest. Michael crept toward his office, where he kept a locked drawer. Inside, beneath stacks of corporate contracts and old files, was a gun he had never thought he'd need. His hands shook as he loaded it, the weight foreign in his grip. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a criminal. He was a CEO, a man who fought his battles in boardrooms, not in the dark of his own home. But tonight, none of that mattered. The sound of the elevator dinged softly from the hall. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. Whoever was here hadn't come to talk. Michael turned off the living room lights, plunging the space into shadow. The only illumination came from the distant city skyline. He crouched low, moving with a caution he didn't know he was capable of. Every instinct screamed at him to protect Sarah and Lily at any cost. Then he saw it, through the thin crack of the door, a figure moving across the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black. And behind him, another. They were armed. Michael's pulse thundered. He stepped back, gripping the gun tighter. He had to think. If he called the police now, it might be too late. If he tried to confront them head-on, he could get them all killed. Sarah's weak voice whispered from the sofa, trembling. Michael, they know about you. They know everything. That's why I brought her here. You're the only one they can't scare. Michael's jaw tightened. The weight of her words settled heavily on him. The only one they can't scare. The intruders moved deeper into the penthouse, their flashlights sweeping across the walls. One of them muttered something in a language Michael didn't recognize, but the tone was clear. They were hunting. He glanced back at Sarah and Lily, two fragile lives depending on him. For years, he had told himself that his business was all that mattered. That money, power, and control were the only things worth fighting for. But in this moment, Michael realized he had never truly fought for anything. Not really. Until now. He took a slow, steady breath, his hand tightening on the gun. The men were inside his world now. His space. And Michael Grant was done running from the ghosts of his past. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a CEO. He was a father. He was a protector. And tonight, he would fight. The sound of shattered glass ripped through the silence of Michael's estate like a gunshot. It was past midnight, and the once peaceful house had turned into a battleground. He had been waiting for this moment ever since he saw the black SUV crawl past his gates earlier that day. Michael grabbed the fire poker he had set beside the couch, his heart pounding like a war drum. Upstairs, Sarah held Lily tightly, whispering soft promises to keep her calm. But Michael could hear the girl's muffled sobs, each one slicing into his chest. He moved quickly, padding barefoot across the polished wood floors, knowing the intruders were already inside. Two figures emerged from the shadowy hallway. Men dressed in black, their faces hidden behind balaclavas. One carried a pistol. The other had a crowbar that glistened faintly under the dim hallway light. "Michael Carter," one of them said, his voice low, deliberate, filled with a chilling familiarity. "Hand over the woman and the girl. This doesn't have to get messy." Michael's blood ran cold. They knew his name. This wasn't a random break-in. It was orchestrated. He tightened his grip on the fire poker, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're not taking them," he growled. "Not while I'm standing here." The man with the pistol smirked, tilting his head slightly. "You've been standing for a long time, Carter. Building empires, hiding skeletons. Tonight, you'll watch one of them bury you." The words sent a rush of heat up Michael's spine. He lunged, swinging the fire poker with all his strength. The crowbar-wielding intruder blocked him, the metal-on-metal clash echoing violently through the hall. The force rattled Michael's arms, but he didn't back down. The fight erupted like a storm. Michael was strong, driven by fury and fear, but the intruders were younger, faster. One shoved him hard against the wall, the pistol pressed into his chest. For a split second, Michael saw his own reflection in the man's eyes. Desperate, cornered, haunted. But before the trigger could be pulled, Sarah's scream shattered the air. "Michael!" The sound jolted him. Using every ounce of strength, he slammed his elbow into the gunman's jaw, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The second man lunged at him, crowbar raised, but Michael twisted away, the swing smashing into a lamp instead, sparks crackling as the room plunged into near darkness. Michael dove for the gun, his fingers brushing the cold metal just as the intruder grabbed his leg, dragging him back. They wrestled on the floor, the weight of the struggle pressing down on his chest, each breath harder to draw. Upstairs, Sarah clutched Lily, torn between running and helping. Her heart hammered as she watched Michael fighting for all of them. She whispered, "Hold on, please, hold on." Back in the hallway, Michael finally gained the upper hand. With a primal roar, he struck the man across the face with the butt of the gun, sending him sprawling. The second intruder staggered to his feet, blood trickling from his mouth, eyes blazing with rage. "You have no idea who you're protecting," he hissed, pointing toward the staircase where Sarah and Lily stood frozen. "That woman ruined everything." Michael raised the gun, his finger trembling on the trigger. "Then maybe it's time someone ruined you." The intruder lunged one final time, but Michael fired. The gunshot exploded through the house, deafening, final. The man crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Sarah's muffled sobs upstairs. Michael stood there, chest heaving, smoke still curling from the barrel of the gun. His body shook with adrenaline, but his eyes were locked on the fallen man. He had won the fight, but the war, he knew, was far from over. Because the man's final words echoed in his mind, words that hinted at a past Sarah had yet to explain. And Michael realized that the real confrontation was only just beginning. The gunshot echoed into silence. Michael stood frozen, his chest heaving, the pistol shaking in his grip. His ears rang, his hands trembling as he stared at the man sprawled on the hardwood floor, blood pooling beneath him. The two other intruders had already fled, leaving nothing but broken glass, overturned furniture, and a suffocating quiet in their wake. Sarah crouched in the corner, clutching Lily tightly against her chest. Tears streaked down her face, but she kept whispering, it's over," as if speaking it into existence would make it true. Michael lowered the gun slowly, his body giving way to exhaustion. His knees buckled, and he collapsed into a chair, his shirt damp with sweat and streaked with grime. For the first time in years, he felt like a man stripped bare. Not a CEO, not a public figure, just a human who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. Sarah's gaze lifted to him, her voice hoarse. "You didn't have to do this for us." Michael met her eyes, his voice cracking. "I couldn't let them hurt you, or her." He looked at Lily, who had buried her face into her mother's shoulder. "But you have to tell me the truth now. No more pieces. No more half-answers. Who were they? Why were they after you? And why? Why did I feel like I already knew you?" The weight in the room shifted. Sarah hesitated, then slowly stood, carrying Lily to the couch. She placed the little girl down gently, still wrapped in a blanket, still trembling, and brushed a strand of hair from her pale forehead before turning back to Michael. "You deserve to know," she whispered. "But I don't know if you're ready for the truth." Michael leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Try me." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Years ago, I wasn't who I am now. My name wasn't even Sarah. I was part of something dark. I was young, reckless, and I got involved with people who promised me protection, money, and a family I never had. But they were criminals, organized, dangerous, ruthless. They used me. And when I finally tried to get out, I took something from them. Something they never forgave me for." Michael felt his heartbeat hammering in his chest. "What did you take?" Sarah's eyes glistened. "Evidence. Documents that tied them to trafficking, extortion, money laundering, you name it. I thought if I exposed them, I could set myself free. But before I could, they came for me. I barely escaped. That's when I changed my name. That's when I became Sarah. And that's when... Her voice broke. When Lily was born. Michael stared at her, the pieces beginning to fall into place like shards of glass cutting into his mind. So she's... Sarah nodded, tears spilling over. She's his daughter. The man you just... She choked back a sob, pointing shakily at the lifeless body on the floor. That was him. He found me. He wanted Lily back. Not because he loved her, he never even acknowledged her, but because he knew she was mine. Taking her would have been the final punishment. The room felt colder, the silence heavier. Michael's head spun. He thought back to his own childhood, to a mother who had run from an abusive man, to nights he spent lying awake in fear of footsteps on the stairs. The same cycle, the same cruelty, was playing out before his eyes. Only this time, he had intervened. Michael stood, his voice quiet but steady. You don't have to run anymore. Not with me here. Not with what I have. Sarah blinked, confusion crossing her tear-streaked face. Michael walked to his study, rummaging through his safe until he pulled out a black folder, the kind that never saw the light of day. He placed it on the coffee table in front of her. My company, my resources. I've been building a network for years. Part of me always knew I'd need it. Not just for business, but for protection. If we use this, your evidence, my reach, we can burn what's left of them to the ground. Sarah stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Why would you risk everything for us? Michael's jaw tightened. His eyes softened as they flicked toward Lily, who had finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Because no one did it for me, he said quietly. And I swore if I ever got the chance, I'd stop the cycle. Sarah broke down then, sobs racking her frame as she leaned into him, clutching him not as a savior, but as someone who finally understood. The night bled into dawn, the first rays of sunlight spilling through the broken windows. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, Michael felt clarity. He wasn't just a man haunted by his past. He was a man who had stepped into someone else's storm and refused to let them drown. The truth was out. The fight was just beginning. And deep down, Michael knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The house was finally quiet. Police had come and gone. Paramedics had treated Sarah and Lily for shock, and neighbors stood in hushed clusters outside, whispering about the violence that had unfolded in the mansion of a man they thought they knew. But Michael sat alone in his study, the leather chair creaking under the weight of more than his body. It was the crushing burden of choice. His world had split into two realities. The one where he remained the untouchable CEO, surrounded by luxury, status, and control. And the one where he had lifted a car trunk and discovered a story that would change him forever. Sarah had told him everything. About the man she once trusted, the criminal who had forced her into silence. About the debts, the abuse, the threats that had spiraled into years of hiding. And about Lily, the daughter she had fought to protect with every ounce of strength she had left. For Michael, the words had landed like jagged glass in his chest. Because in some strange way, he saw himself in Sarah. Not the same wounds, not the same story, but the same quiet battle of survival. She had survived the streets. He had survived the boardroom. She had fought for her child. He had fought for his name. Now, he realized survival wasn't enough. That night, Michael did something no investor, no shareholder, no tabloid could have predicted. He sat at the dining table with Sarah and Lily, poured them warm cups of tea, and whispered words he had not spoken in years. You're safe now. As long as I'm alive, you're safe. And he meant it. Not as a man with wealth, not as a CEO with power, but as a man who, for the first time in a long time, had remembered his own humanity. The next morning, the sun broke across the mansion, painting its walls gold. For once, it wasn't sterile. It wasn't a fortress. It felt alive. Sarah moved cautiously through the kitchen, still adjusting to the safety she wasn't used to. Lily laughed, really laughed, as Michael clumsily tried to flip pancakes. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was something he hadn't had in years. A family. Michael knew the danger wasn't fully gone. The men behind the attack might regroup. The scars Sarah carried wouldn't fade overnight. And Lily's innocence had been tested far too young. But he also knew this. When he opened that trunk, he had been given a second chance. Not just to save them, but to save himself. And maybe that's what life does to us. It throws us into battles we don't expect. It forces us to make choices that tear us apart. But sometimes, in the mess, in the fear, in the pain, we stumble upon a chance to become who we were always meant to be. Michael had stumbled upon his. And this time, he wasn't letting it go. So I want to leave you with a question tonight. If you were in Michael's shoes, if you opened that trunk and saw a terrified child whisper, "Please help my mommy," what would you do? Would you turn away, or would you risk everything to save someone else's life? Think about that as you close this video. And if this story moved you, if you felt the fear, the tension, and the hope alongside Michael, Sarah, and Lily, then don't leave just yet. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week we bring you tales that remind us how fragile and powerful the human spirit truly is. And share this story with someone who needs it. Because maybe, just maybe, they'll realize they, too, have the power to step up when the moment comes. This isn't just a story about a CEO or a hidden past. It's a story about us. About what we choose when life forces us into the trunk of fate. So, what would you choose?